Hey, I'm just going to do a quick review of how to do some triangulation and spotting for plein air painting and go over the example that I did. I spent probably somewhere between an hour and a half and 2 hours doing this underdrawing for this plein air painting. I was just sitting outside, out by the softball field there, and doing a lot of measuring. Here's what the picture looks like. So before I did any painting at all, I walked around several times and was doing this and trying to find a pretty good spot that I could sit down with an interesting composition where the light was hitting, where the shadows were hitting. And this was the spot I settled on finally. There was a lot of good spots I could choose. I didn't mind at all that there were other things in the picture besides the pretty parts. You can see that I have a trash can in part of the painting here. It's all about trying to figure out what's going to look interesting in this picture plane. And then once I had that measurement's based off of the size of my paper. I went like this first. Had my paper been smaller, I would have adjusted it, right, to frame everything up. And then I did a lot of this. And I want this building in so that it's 1/5 of the way in. And I measured out 1/5 and went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and double checked, triple checked, and how tall in the frame do I want it. And that action is just repeated like hundreds and hundreds of times over to get it. There's a couple of other tricks that I use too, but that's the big one. And I already showed some video instructions on how to do triangulation, where you measure the distance of something and then you use that same measurement and count over 2, 3, 4, 5. And that same action, but up is 3. And you can add imaginary lines in. So there are examples where I extended this line out, or I extended fence poles out, and I just compared. If this kept going up, where would it intersect with this other one? If this one kept going over, where would it compare to this one? And you constantly are doing this. On this building, for example, if I measure this way, I could also do an invisible line this direction to see if the height versus the width is right. And it's just lots and lots and lots of this. Sometimes I find it's helpful that, especially on a flat surface that's supposed to be rectangular, to draw an X through it so that I know where the middle of that would be. An X through that. You can see there's an X through my window. I did the same thing with my fence over here. There are some 2-point perspective drawing tips that you can use. Videos on YouTube will help with that. I also have printouts in the class that you can use that show how you can accurately use 2-point perspective. In my picture, from where I'm sitting, there is 2 points of perspective. One vanishing point is actually behind this building right here, but a bunch of my lines all converge on that point for the buildings that were sitting flat against me and moving into the distance. So like the roof of this dugout here. Those lines were all heading towards that vanishing point. And my other vanishing point, which is like for the fence, is actually way off the side of the page over here. And that helps to kind of keep things in place also. Even this fence line way over here goes towards this vanishing point. So if you have questions about how to do that, please refer to some video instructions on 2-point perspective. Or if you're looking straight down a sidewalk and it's going right down the middle, that would be a 1-point perspective. And that'll give you some helpful hints on that. I'm trying to make the rounds to help as many people as I can with that. Again, there's a printout in the class for that. But besides that, you have to know that my proportions on this were not right the first time. This took several tries for every single building, basically. I'd make a mark and then I would double check it. Like, is the width of the dugout the same as the distance that I see here? No, not quite. Okay, I'm going to redo that line. And I'm going to make it here instead, which is why it's so important to draw light first. Remember, this is an underdrawing. We're going to end up painting over the top. It doesn't have to look flawless, but if you draw light, making erase marks is so much easier. And constant action. How tall are these bleachers supposed to be compared to the building? Well, 1, 2, a little less than a third. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. How wide are they supposed to be? Well, if I use that same action, a little less than 1.5, and then compare this to this, is that the same? Compare this to this, and this to this. And it can be arbitrary things too. How tall is the fence here compared to the width? Okay, that looks right. If I have to draw a diagonal to make sure, okay. There's another video that I linked that shows how you can use angles on a clock to try to get the measurements right on angles. Like the angle of this roof for you would be around a 4 o'clock angle. If I'm imagining a clock face right here, 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, that's around a 4 o'clock angle for that roof. So constantly thinking what angle should this be at, and then associating it with the clock time is super helpful too. Okay. Sometimes I extend my lines well beyond where they're supposed to go just so I get an idea spatially how they work in perspective, keeping that perspective dot in line, which is why this looks wider up here than it does down here. The sidewalk kind of thins out as it goes back. None of this has to be flawless, but that is some things that I think will help with it. And now that I have a pretty good under drawing in place, I'm actually going to put a base coat. I've decided I'm on watercolor paper mounted on board. I'm going to eventually paint in gouache, but I'm going to start in watercolor. And I've decided that because is a lot of blue sky in my background, I'm going to go opposite on my underpainting there, and then eventually go over gouache with really light blues. And I know that those will work well because I have a pretty good idea of color schematics and what I'm hoping to do. And I'm planning on using actually a split analogous color palette. So analogous means that they're close, and I'm planning on using kind of this range here, light greens, light yellows, light oranges in some of my grass. But I will also have blues, and blues are going to be found on the opposite side, right? So I'm going to limit my range actually to my grasses being kind of here in this warm category, and then my blues being almost directly opposite of that, but really, really light. So it'll basically be like a split complementary when I'm done with it. Yeah, it'll be somewhere in here like a light blue, a really light green, and then a really light orangey color as well. So I'm thinking about that before I ever even touch color on the painting. I'm going to go ahead and actually do a light wash on this now. Wash should be really, really see-through. I'm going to shake this up. I'm going to shake this up. I'm not going to go pure yellow. I'm going to dilute it, the purity of that yellow just a little bit, and add some brown into it. It's a little dark. It's pretty close to where I want it. I'm going to have water and a paper towel close by. That's concentrated paint that I just put in, so I can dilute that down quite a bit with water. I'm going to test this out just in the corner, see if I'm satisfied with it. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. I definitely should be able to see my marks still underneath. I'm going to be covering basically all of this later. This will give me a nice base coat to start with. Notice these big sweeping motions going right off the sides here. This does not have to be perfect. I'm going to cover it up later anyway, but this will give some vibrancy to the colors as I put some more on top. Yeah, pretty good. Pretty satisfied with that. Just gonna let that dry for a bit. My next step will be to go through outside from observation and to focus in on where my shadows are. I'm going to find my shadows by squinting, and I'm actually going to go through. I'm going to use kind of an opposite color for my shadow block in, which is going to be probably a soft violet.
Teachers and students, the food truck has arrived. It is on the north side by the basketball gym. Go get a killer dog.
So I'm going to go in with some light purples on top there to end it up. And I'll do that outside from observation. Keep in mind that as you work, your shadows are going to change. That's part of plein air painting. So you'll need to decide kind of what time of day, and probably repeat this process several times, or very, very quickly block in where you want your shadows to go. And then just be aware that they'll change later on. And you'll have to kind of adapt to that. So you want to be consistent with your shadows though. You don't want some shadows showing that it's 10 o'clock in the morning and some shadows showing that it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon. That won't turn out well for you. You want to be consistent. I find that just marking in very, very lightly with pencil during a particular time where my shadows are laying down on the ground is very, very helpful. And also be taking some reference photos. Again, we're not going to be painting from the photos hardly at all, but it is helpful to recall back, especially with things like time-specific stuff with weather or with shadows or things like that. All right.